Hello and welcome to the Youthwork Plus podcast. My name is Becky Lawrence, your host, and I'm joined today by our lovely guest, Lewis Simonds, who is from Frideswides Church here in Milton Keynes. He is currently a curate there. We first met a few years ago at a citywide youth event called Hope MK. So we've known each other a little while, but I'll let Lewis unpack a little bit more about how, when and why he got into youth, kids and ministry in general, and how he ended up as a curate.
In a way, it's all intertwined in my journey.
Yeah.
I sort of 18, 19, 20 at university, I was studying history, and I had a forming of a desire to work with young people, and so initially explored that through going into teaching. So I then became a secondary school teacher for history for a number of years. And actually, those who are teachers know that that's quite a maximum kind of capacity in some regards to how much time and energy you have for working with young people. So that was all I was really doing with them. And after a period of time, I left teaching to go into adult education and training, and it kind of created this gap and capacity in my life where I still wanted to work with young people, but that had been removed from my profession. So initially I then joined the scouting movement as a leader, and then volunteering with youth work and children's work at church. This is all generally sort of coinciding with what the Church of England called the discernment process, where one is questioning whether they're being called to ordained ministry. And as it's probably obvious, that is the journey that I took. But whilst I was in that kind of phase of exploring, am I called to certain things, my ministry was focused in living and working with children and young people and youth. And mostly it was teenage age, because I was a secondary school teacher and was a scout leader at the time, which is 10 to 14 years old. So both of them held together was ultimately also then why and how we met at Hope MK, because that's what I was doing at that time. And then I was at St. Frideswides as a member of the congregation, and then I left and I went to train at Theological College for 3 years. So this is the past sort of 3 years that have gone, and then I have actually returned to St. Frideswides as a curate here, and obviously in a different capacity and a different kind of calling, but very much still now taking my position as a curate and trying to connect it with what I was doing with young people before I was ordained. So that's why they are merged and mixed together, actually.
Yeah. Unpack a little bit more for us. What does your current role entail? Obviously, you are a curate, so you're still learning, on the job to be a vicar. But then as part of your role, you are also doing some youth and kids focused stuff. So unpack what that looks like for you and how your role serves young people and families.
Well, as you say, being a curate is a training phase still, but you're training through much more active ministry. What I'd been previously doing the last 3 years was college-based, academic, going away to do thinking. People call you like the apprentice vicar and those sorts of things, which is sort of fair enough terms. What you can do as a curate is such a massive field, because it depends on which church you're at and what your supervisor is hoping and expecting and what you personally need to develop and all the things that will need to be proficient at doing as a vicar in the future. But then there is autonomy in there, because we're all, whether we're ordained or not, and whatever phase of life we're in, we're called to something that suits our skills. And if we're listening to God, then we're kind of trying to align those things. And I still feel called into children's, youth and families ministry. But really what I'm doing is I'm slotting into an established church, which has an established children's and youth and family team and program and focus. And I'm trying to sort of connect and build, well, this is what I have been doing previously before I was ordained, and then when I was training, and sort of slotting in and building in that space. What that means in specifics is I haven't joined a church which has we've got no children and no children's worker and no children's program, but we want to, which might be a situation that other curates find themselves in churches. And that's great if the church is in that place where they recognise things are not there and they want to, that's great. But actually, I am joining a church that has really highly valued young people and families for a long period of time. And so actually, I'm trying to probe and question that core heart of children and families being a priority. Is that definitely remaining there in how we worship as a community on Sundays and in courses and in different kind of discipleships and ministries and acts of fellowships, and even stuff like how the space is used and how resources are allocated? And ultimately, what I'm feeling to do at the moment is just ask that question: this church has really openly declared children and families are very, very central and important. And I want to go, okay, has that actually translating into what is happening there? Because sometimes you can think it and then you think it's happening, and then just maybe a fresh pair of eyes or just a sort of stock check. Is the church still doing what it has intended to do? Yes or no? And if it's yes, then that's great. That's things to build on. And if it's no, then you got stuff to do.
Yeah.
There's a collection of reasons why children's and families, and I use it as a very collective term because it can mean ministries, or it can mean how they're involved in worship, or so many things. But I feel that children and families aren't as integrated and connected with churches as we would all hope. If you're kind of accepting that narrative that there are fewer children in church than there once was, etc., and that's not ideal, is because things aren't always that inclusive and they're not that accessible. And when things aren't very inclusive or accessible, it's very hard to feel welcomed there. And to make children and youth and then their families, which includes parents who are trying to parent at the same time as being part of that community or worshipping or whatever they're doing, to make them feel included and make things accessible for them is lots of little small things really that has to be driven by a real purposeful heart, that actually we're going to do this and it's going to be hard work and we're going to make changes for that. So it's looking at every aspect of what's going on and thinking, and this is a kind of habit I've got into. Whenever I'm at any kind of Christian act of worship or fellowship or ministry, have a little mental audit. I think if I was a child here, that's a more hard one to do. But if I was a parent coming here with young children, which is my current situation, would I find this inclusive? Would I find it accessible? Would I even would this even make sense to me? And if those answers aren't really strongly yes, then I can understand why you go, I'm not very welcomed here and this isn't for me. And that's where I think a church can trip itself up sometimes. You got to ask that hard question. What's it like to walk in here as a parent with a child, or walk in here as a child, or walk in here as a teenager? Am I welcome?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question to ask, isn't it? And helps us think outside the box in terms of how we do church. I think there's lots of churches, isn't there, that haven't changed things because over a number of years, we're talking decades and decades, the way that church has been done, I think traditionally hasn't changed a lot. Whereas there's a lot more that we know now about people in terms of learning styles and how people engage with things and how to make things accessible. Yet the way that church has been done traditionally has stayed the same for a lot of number of years. And I think we're getting to the point now where there are lots of churches who are doing things differently, or church plants who are doing things totally differently, really thinking outside the box. But I think we need to be asking those questions so that we can pivot and change. And I'm not talking about throwing everything out the window, but there are some things, like traditionally church has been a place where you've come, you've sat down and you've listened for a long period of time. And we know that some people, they don't learn by listening. And so sitting down and listening to a 2-hour sermon isn't going to be the way that every single person in the audience is going to learn. And so even thinking through how we do church for adults, I think needs to be a consideration, doesn't it? Let alone how we do church that is going to welcome and accept people of all different ages and stages as well. Yeah.
You're totally right. And we have those great expressions of church that they almost can get away with doing not the usual kind of traditional acts of worship or how things are expected in terms of the liturgy and the held traditions and things. And I'm an advocate of those. So if you think of your church going, okay, we'll have a children's service every other week or once a month, or a breakfast service and those things, because that gives us the space to then throw all these real flexibilities in it. That's great. And I want to see that, and I'm really encouraged when I see that. And those things generally are then very inclusive and welcoming for families and children. It's back at those other things that can hold a lot of core of the church in terms of people and the time slots and the power and space of the church it's those environments that I don't want to be neglected in terms of accessibility. And it's a real point, and someone at church made it much more articulate than I've ever done, which is we've got to kind of view church as this sort of menu of things when we're worshipping, like the different kind of ways that people are going to engage with this worship. Is it diverse, and is it thoughtful about a human mind? But that came from a place of someone trying to help children engage with it, and then actually the unwitting, when you've really thought about something going on at church from the point of view of a child or a teen or a young family, and you've made some positive improvements, it's not that a separate adult is then going, oh, that's happened. I'm either glad that that's happening and this group's welcome, or you might feel, oh, I'm frustrated there are changes, but they are in fact welcome. I believe that kind of separate adult will in fact have a more engaged experience at church. So it's kind of benefits all round. What helps the families helps the entire church, actually. I was sort of talking very generally there. And actually what I realized, lots of people have really good ideas about the specific things, like, okay, well, let's think about like neurodiversity during a service. Let's talk about length. Let's talk about insert. So many ideas that when you get a group of people together who are interested in making church accessible for people, we have so many ideas. I'm not even sort of advocating saying like, come on, let's get some ideas together, or look how many ideas I have, because I recognize that isn't even probably my strength. It's one step back, which is, are you truly committed to gathering of those ideas and implementing them and trialing them and accepting that they might feel chaotic and odd at first? Because the barrier that I see there isn't a lack of ideas, and sometimes there aren't a lack of advocates like yourself, Becky, and the people who actually listen to this podcast. It's the one step further back where a church may or may not have realized that things can be different, and that it's good and it's godly to be seeking to include the diversity of people in the church in a greater way. And I'm really pleased to be at St. Frideswides, because as a church, they're very open to that. And then if one has an idea and it's going to make things more accessible and more welcoming to people, ultimately, let's give it a try first of all. And then if it's working, that's really helpful.
Yeah, and I think that really helps, doesn't it? Because I think it can be really hard if you're in a church, especially as leaders within churches. I think sometimes there can be a fear, can't there, that we don't want to change anything because we don't want to rock the boat and we don't want to upset people. We definitely don't want to upset the people who give the most money, because that will change everything, and potentially put our jobs at risk and things like that. And so sometimes we're afraid to make the changes because we don't want to upset people. But then at the same time, unless you try things, you don't really know if they're going to work. And sometimes the change can be a really good thing, especially if it's God-led. That's the best kind of change.
It's a great point. I want to move on, because so far we've talked about things I think people go, I'm if you're listening to Youthwork Plus podcast, you're like, yep, okay, this is preaching to the converted already. Where I have been afforded the kind of space to be studying and doing research the past few years is to actually, when we take that step back and go, I'm not sure a church has switched on to be willing to step into this space. Why is that the case? Why is it wrong to stay in that space where you're not, in fact, willing to step over the threshold to be very radical and different for the benefit of families? Part of some research that I have been doing formally for a year and a half or so, but mentally in my mind for many years, actually, it was all kind of taking place. Yeah. We in society have a kind of accepted tolerance to deprioritize children. I'm being very deliberate in my language, because I've been very pokey with my language in the past, and I don't think that always warms people up very well. And so I'm trying to be a bit more soft with it. But there is a superficial valuing of children in our society. I'm talking kind of UK Western world. I'm not travelled enough to speak globally. Yeah. I'm talking largely 20th, 21st century. But we'd think and say, okay, you live in Britain in 2025. Children are looked after. Children are valued, and actually they're seen as important. I'd say I think that's not correct. Actually, we have authoritarian systems that prioritize adults over children. We have an economic system that favors adults basically earning money and being contributors in society. This argument isn't really mine. I've just picked this up from reading stuff about the value of parents and children in society, and even more specifically, mums in society who have it worse from the female angle as well, and the kind of legacy of what we've got there. And I think that's a convincing argument, actually. We look at things like maternity leave and paternity leave in this country. It's way off what happens in other European countries. We have some kind of cultural similarities being the same continent. But even if it was the levels that parents can experience in other countries, it's still not very good. And it's not very good because ultimately what we need is parents to have their children and then get back to work as quickly as possible so that they're an economic unit moving things forward. And you might think, well, we're just talking about babies here, and actually we're talking about children and teenagers in church. But those foundational years of a baby being formed, the more time they can have with their parents, and kind of if society can graciously give parents that support, that proper support, then there are so many benefits. And that shows proper value to children and families. We don't live in a country and a society that is orientated in that way. People, you may disagree or agree, which is fine. I would encourage you to research and do some kind of reading and think about it. A particular author, Sarah Ockwell-Smith, articulates these things very well, where she sort of advocates that actually children are superficially valued. I took all that thinking and I was like, okay, this is very much a kind of almost like a secular argument about the place of children in society that says that they're commonly lower than adults in the pecking order of things. And I started to think, okay, well, are the church mirroring that, or have they really successfully upped against that damaging societal trend? And the more I looked at it and the more I thought about it, I thought actually overall the church is mirroring that too. This obviously comes with a massive caveat that there are many, many people in many places that don't act like this and really, really value children. And I think if you're probably listening or watching this, you're in that category because you've come out of your way to think about how to work with children and young people. But there are swathes that aren't necessarily in that place. And mostly it's not even recognised as this actual sort of accidental, unconscious bias against children that is there. And it's hard to hear this because if someone say, I think our society and sometimes even our church is actually oppressing and holding down children and families in a kind of like actual really sort of sinful way, that's pretty hard to hear, and people can refute it. People do refute me. I'm a few more years past that revelation point. I think that is what is happening, and I always come to peace with that reality so I can actually work within it. But that's the ultimate thing that I'm trying to keep that in my hands so that when I go into the multiple different situations that I get luckily enough to kind of be involved in as a curate, I can go, am I witnessing this thing that I think is broken about the world? Am I being complicit in it? Like, which we can all slip into. And if I am, then that's for me to be working on. And if I'm, by God's grace, not, am I seeing that here? And what can I do in that kind of small thing? And I'm not looking for a massive thinking I can do a massive revolution about how everyone views children and families in the world. But if you can get to that point where you think children are really deprioritized, children and families are squashed down, they're not by default anywhere near as prioritized as adults and the things that are afforded in that front, then that's a thing you can hold in your hands. And it changes your perspective in different situations. And Jesus spoke about this. Let the children come to me. I was reading this before. This was like my pep talk bit of Bible from Mark. People were bringing little children to him in order that he might touch them. And the disciples spoke sternly to them. Disciples spoke sternly to them. That's that. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant. Now, if I did something and Jesus was indignant, you'd hold that forever, wouldn't you? You think, oh, I need to work on that. And what I'm trying to kind of kindly do, and it annoys people sometimes, I get lots of funny looks, is say, I think you're being stern, and Jesus is indignant at that being stern. We don't have to be stern, but if you're holding this kind of sternness without even knowing it, or thinking, well, those disciples it, we don't know more of the context about it, but almost like they were naturally sternful about children, and Jesus was indignant about that. You've got to hold that, like, that experience in your mind for all occasions when children and family might be part of something, which is everything. Every single aspect, part of kind of church decision making is for the church family on the whole. And so that's my kind of call to people to think, well, am I being that stern disciple? And it's really complicated what that being stern means, and it requires way more like thinking and discussing than just like a kind of a short podcast chat.
Yeah.
What was the original question? What am I doing, I think?
Yeah, no, just fine. We've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but I think this is great conversation. What I was prompted to talk about next was churches, because I think some churches, I agree with your point that I think we don't prioritise children and young people enough generally, I think, as a whole in the church. I think some churches do, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say that all don't, but I think we could all be doing more. But I think some churches, they would say, we have a kids' corner, therefore we don't do that. We don't oppress children. Or we do an annual Christingle service, therefore we tick the box, we do something for children. Or even that we have kids and youth groups on a Sunday morning that we take the kids out to, whether that's weekly or monthly or whatever. Therefore, we've ticked the box and we do something for kids and youth. We're not oppressing them. But I think we have to go further than all of those things, and that what we're being asked to do is to champion children and young people more within the church. So how can we think through how we give them a more prominent place within how we do things, even, like PCCs or church governance groups are usually 100% adults. How can we involve and invite children and young people to be a part of that? And maybe that's not having them as members, but maybe that's sometimes consulting them on some of the big decisions that we make within churches. I think sometimes volunteering teams and people who serve within the church, sometimes they're all 100% adults. I think sometimes there's definitely space to invite children and young people to be involved, to serve in some of those roles alongside adults. And not everything is going to apply, but there's definitely opportunity for them to get involved in some things. And I think there's always more that we can do.
Agree.
I don't know whether there's any more ideas or things that you want to throw in there.
So part of my research was this kind of idea that what I can't just do is present this like punch at churches and church communities, because that's not nice. You've got to say, and if this resonates with you, if you think I'm a fool, fine, sorry. But if you think, there might be something in this, what can I do? I actually created this audit for a church, and I was like, score yourself out of 1 to 10 for the following. I don't know, it was like 20 things there. Again, this goes back to I need others. I need people like yourself and the involved in this to build that list. But if you're like scoring 1, it's not present at all, or 10, it's completely present and strong, then that really kind of orientates yourself as to think, am I being stern and holding, I'm holding things away from children and not offering them, or not? And so it was like, do we have accessible provision for children and like accessible worship provision? And that's quite vague, but I think in between multiple pages in a book and then a hymn book and then people just reciting liturgy because they know it, and things like that I don't think are accessible to children, let alone people who are new to the church. Do you have input from children on church matters? Do you actually have some sort of resource investment, like money and people? Do you engage with children outside of your church? We do have the Sunday corner and we have those things, but are you knocking on the school's doors and the scout group's doors and those things? Do you support external organisations like Youthwork Plus? Do you involve children in rotas, worships, prayers? Is there a regular congregation which reflects the surrounding communities? That's a massive question. If there's children in your parish, and they're not in the church, then that's a low score. And not that you measure like people being there equals good discipleship and good love of Christ. I know it doesn't translate like that, but it's a starter. Do you have policies and procedures that are related to children and they're actually up to date and designed to include them? Do you have regular opportunities for young and old people to mix and form relationships? That's a really massive one. You can't, you know that you can't break down those barriers. It was interesting you said, like, we have our Sunday corner and we have it before church and Sunday, and that will keep whatever's existing in its current state. But the mixing is really essential. Children's ministry actually focused on genuine discipleship rather than entertaining. I have taken one of my children to the Sunday group before, and it was mostly playing boxing on the Wii. And it's entertaining, but it's not genuine discipleship. And I think if you delivered a sermon that was just entertaining but didn't mention Jesus, the Bible, or any sort of Christian teaching, the adults would rightly say, sorry, please don't do that again. But we're much more acceptable to think, oh, well, we'll just kind of keep the children entertained until they're proper adults when they can think things. Opportunities for children to access sacraments, an effective way to gather children and young people's views, and then adjusted liturgy, which is accessible to children. So they're just some things which I'll happily share this. I don't know if you have like mechanisms for passing it through, but if any of that's lacking, that's at least like a starting point in a way.
Yeah, so that reminds me that at some point there are a few different documents that we're hoping to have on our website. It would be helpful to include something like that in the list of PDFs that people can download and use. I'm also planning to put together things like how do you begin with safeguarding? How do you write a strategy for children and young people within your church? Different documents like that hopefully people can just pick up and begin to know where to start on those kind of things. We can definitely put that order document into the collection that hopefully we're going to have at some point over the next few months on our website. But if anyone wants it in the meantime, if you want it already, then feel free to email me or email us either through the website or becky@youthworkplus.com. And I can send that out to anybody who wants it. I'm a total advocate for intergenerational ministry. One of the reasons why we chose to be involved in the church that we're part of St Mark's, Milton Keynes, which is a non-traditional Anglican church plant. We meet cafe style on a Sunday, round tables, because we thought that was going to be a whole lot more welcoming to families and people who weren't used to traditional sitting in rows church on Sundays. But we try to be quite proactive in how we engage children and young people within those. So in the past, we did take children and young people out every Sunday for their own thing, whereas now we keep them in a lot more. And that, to be honest, was a happy accident of COVID. So obviously during COVID, we couldn't do that so much. So we were doing an all-age service online every week, and including elements that engaged everybody. And then when we came back to meeting in person after COVID, on purpose, we chose to keep some of those elements. And we've always done things like we've had an open mic section as part of our Sundays where people can stand up and share something they want prayer for, share a good news story, share something. So our young people stand up, they can come up and tell a joke if they want. They can come up and say, I won a swimming badge this week. They can come up and say, my grandma's ill or my friend's ill. Can you pray for them? And our children, young people love that little section. There's always children, young people that stand up and share as part of that. And don't get me wrong, there's risk as well in that. Like, you don't know what they're going to say. But I think it's the same with adults. You don't know what they're going to say. Anybody could stand up and say anything.
I really like the way you put that. The kind of the debate between the classic, like, do you have children at church? Do you take them elsewhere because you can do something very specific for them and they can have that space and all that comfort, or do you do it intergenerationally? It's a really interesting debate. And if a church has one of those models really heavily more than another, I'm not saying one is correct or the other. But what is important is that you have properly thought through why you've chosen one over the other. And if that conclusion, you think, does that really honour what children, teens and families are like? Because if I'm being blunt, if you're removing children because they are loud and risky and a bit chaotic and kind of introduce that uncontrolled element, if that's your conclusion, that's when I'd say, okay, and are you comfortable with that conclusion? Because is that an inclusive and welcoming and acceptable kind of thought about a core part of your family there? And would you do the same if it was an adult group that you like? And it's just asking those kind of probing questions about things. And I'm not in charge of a church, and not that a vicar is ever in charge of a church. You're stewarding everyone in a way, but I really value the intergenerational stuff because it is harder and it is busier and noisier and stuff, but it's a truer reflection of a family that includes all of its people. And it's really tricky to, if you I suppose if you don't love that kind of intergenerational chaos, to come to terms with it. Because I'm not saying, oh, I've got loads of strategies where you can have it intergenerational, but it is now a traditional kind of church setting, but there are children in there. We're not trying to replicate that kind of childless church environment, but with children in there, because that is just really difficult and would just involve lots of shushing.
Yeah, totally.
But why is that a problem? Is probably the question that comes to it. What I'm not sure that's not what I read in Jesus' interaction with people and the actual like true nature of their lives. He met everyone in their kind of real context with who they are, and was deliberately seeking, the chaotic characters of where he was. It could be that's what children are at this time. They are that kind of beautiful, kind of authentic self. And I can rewind slightly to the original, is society oppressive towards children? The core of that is actually, yes, because we don't accept the authenticity of children, because they're not adults yet who have learned sort of social graces and control in different ways. And that's hard work, and thus it's easier to start to push them into through an authoritarian model to be like, we will get you to be that adult, that small version of an adult, because that is easier for us to, I'm going to say us, adult society, to work with.
Yeah. I think sometimes as churches, we've gone too far the other way as well. If I think back to the family service, churches that I have worked at or been involved in the past, instead of creating something that is accessible to everybody, we've tried to bring the kids, what we would deliver to the kids in the kids group, into the Sunday morning service, and then it's been mostly engaging to the kids, but we've forgotten to also include the adults in that. We've brought puppets in, and we've brought interactive elements. We've brought, people standing at the front in funny clothes, all sorts of things that have been really engaging for the kids, but all the adults in the congregation have gone, oh, it's a family service again this week. Maybe I won't go this week.
And you know what? Fair response, because that is in essence the criticism that one could have of a service that doesn't have any kind of, and that catering for children. And we're not turning everything into Disneyland. It is intergenerational, and I just feel the overall vibe, the church's intergenerational slant is still towards adults. You want it perfectly in the middle, so it's for everyone. That's like a question: like, how far is your church leaning towards favouring the adult members of the congregation? And we're not just talking about Sunday service. Think of all the things a church does.
Yeah.
Can I ask my question?
Yeah, go on.
Because I suppose the genesis of this question for me is I've had conversations with people who've been like, oh, I do want families here, but they come 1 week and then they're not here, and then they might come back and then there's a 2-week gap, and there's a frustration there that you come to church every Sunday. That is what regular church going means. We'll just park the kind of concept that church is way more than a Sunday for a second. What do you think? How regularly does like a family, I'm talking like a family, like a parent with under 18 children, need to come to church like on a Sunday, or like church events or things like that, for them to be considered regular churchgoers, in the same sense that like maybe a generation or two ago you'd say, right, well, if you never miss a Sunday, you're a regular churchgoer. Is that still the case now? Because I think like a response to that question, the answer to that question for everyone who's thinking it, is a bit of an indicator into how well you're appreciating the authenticity of a 21st century family as well, because it's different to an early 20th century family and previously.
Yeah, I think in general people don't commit to things like they used to. And I think some of that is generational, and I think some of that, to be honest, is just off the back of COVID. Like people got used to not doing things for a while and going to things, and they thought, oh, this is nice actually, not having to be involved in everything and be out so many evenings of the week and have to be somewhere all the time. And some people learned that instead of being someone who went to everything, they have slipped into this thing that actually it's okay not to go to things and to say no to things. And so I think that commitment level of people is lower now. Most churches would say they can't measure attendance by weekly attendance anymore, whether that's a Sunday or coming to at least one thing during the week. I think most churches now would say that regular attendance is once a month, someone coming once a month, which is a huge drop from something that used to be a weekly thing that people wouldn't miss. Even within that there are people who obviously are going to be there every week and still think that that's something they want to do. But I think there's a guilt thing as well. So I know for me, as someone who grew up going to church for most of my life, like going every week was something that I did and I thought I had to do. And if I didn't do it, there was a guilt there. I didn't want to feel bad and I didn't want to feel guilty. So I went every week whether I wanted to or not. And I wanted to but I didn't always want to. But the commitment was there. But then I think, I don't know, having grown up now and being, an adult and having a toddler, I know for us as a family, it's been hard for us to go every week since we've had her. We don't always, my daughter's 3 now and she still doesn't always sleep the whole way through the night. She has leaves and development stages where like she's up for long periods within the night, and if it's a Saturday night and we haven't slept very well, sometimes we won't go to church, and I still have that inbuilt guilt within me where I'm like, oh, I feel bad about this. But also, I don't know, I feel like it's more accepted to not go every week, and I feel like we're not the only ones who would think that. But also I think there's a difference now as well. There's a lot more things to do on a Sunday for young families, especially for families who aren't used to going to church, or who haven't been churchgoers since they were children themselves. There's football clubs for kids. There's shops are open now on Sundays. They never used to be. Like there's a whole lot more extra other stuff that people can do on a Sunday, which I think sometimes takes people away from coming and adds another element in there. I still think, if you're going to choose to be part of a church, then your heart should want to be in it and you should want to be there more than once a month. But I also think for some people that's a really hard ask.
There's a good answer overall, but there's a particular fascinating bit that was like, you essentially had no sleep. And so arguably that's a reasonable, sensible, balanced thing to be like, for our toddler and our own health and sanity, we need to rest or whatever. But there's a guilt associated with it. And that's a really great summary of what my thinking is. We've got those structures in our world and in our church where the expectations are still stronger than the reality of what it means to be a child and a parent, and there's a rubbing of the two, and the rub affects the children often, like where you might go, oh well, but I must go because also the message that if I don't go sends blah 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 blah. But then if you're truly honouring what it's like to be a parent of a toddler, you'd go, on balance, this needs to be a line or whatever, how it works. And I'm opening myself up to criticism. There's the concepts of this, the arguments about the Sabbath and not neglecting to meet together and those things. They're all really fair points, but are they used unfairly towards children and families when that there's like that bigger reality of things where we might, otherwise try and see the holistic life that God has given us, rather than just like it was once like this, and therefore that is how it needs to continue. It once was adult focused, and that's how it needs to continue. And actually, if we're into challenging that, but thank you for answering. Honestly,
I think to sum up, I think we can't expect people to be there every week. I think there's more going on in people's lives now than there used to be. I think there's just a lot more complicated things, aren't there? But people not attending doesn't necessarily mean that they're not with you in spirit, if that makes sense, like that they're not still committed and connected. But then I think the other side of the coin there is, when people perhaps don't attend enough, then there's a risk there that people will feel less connected to God, but also to the people, the church community as a whole. And I think there's a huge thing that can be gained by the more that you go to something, the more relationships you build, and the more you're embedded within that.
You're like investing in it.
Yeah. But then also I'd add a third thing into the mix, that it's really hard. I think it's really hard. Some stages of life are really hard, especially my stage at the minute, being parent to a toddler. I feel like when I do go to church, it's totally different than before. When you don't have a small child who wants to play with you during the service, you can 100% be listening to everything and be taking part in everything. You can't do that with a toddler, and that makes church on a Sunday difficult. Like, our church, thankfully, is not one where like children are shushed and expected to be quiet. Otherwise, that adds a whole nother layer of anxiety, I think, for a parent to think, oh, I need to be there, I need to be listening, but I also need to be attentive to my child. But then I also need to keep them quiet, and I also need to keep them in this kids area or whatever, or sat still on a pew, because there isn't a kids area, and they also need to be engaging and listening to something that isn't necessarily child friendly or engaging for them as a child. I think all of those are big asks, aren't they? And I think I found as a parent of a toddler, thankfully, our church is very welcoming. We've had over the years lots of parents who have had babies and toddlers and children and teenagers. And so we have a little corner of the room always has like a couple of comfy chairs. It has a rug. It has some toys on the ground to play with. It has colouring. It has all sorts of things. And then like we always try and do something that's interactive that will engage everybody. So last Sunday just gone, we did like an origami thing as part of the service. So like everybody was taking part in that, and like the kids loved that bit, like getting to do a little origami thing. And then there was a challenge as part of the service as well, where we made an origami cup. Every table had to put as many different items inside the cup as they could.
Yeah.
And the winning table was the one that had the most items in there. And our kids were like, totally competitive, trying to be the winning table, all the kids on tables.
Did the origami cup have some sort of connection with either like the theme or the sermon or the passage of the sermon?
Yes. So we were talking about, it was a verse from Luke. It was talking about God filling us up to be overflowing.
Okay.
So that was the like direct connection. We built a cup, origami cup, and we filled it up to be overflowing with stuff. So like it had a direct connection in there. During the Bible reading part of the service, we had kids stand up and hold the different words as part of the verse. So they were involved in that bit as well, and open mic that we did. There were lots
this is
of
great.
connections.
This is great, and these are all the ideas that are aplenty when you know where to go. Yeah. Which is like my plug for Youthwork Plus on your platform. There are so many creative, super experienced people who have sort of gone, oh, well, if you're doing this passage, here are some ideas. Will you do it? Is the question. If I had to summarize what I was trying to contribute and share here, like, are you actually willing to do that? And here's an interesting one. I don't know who ran that section, but if like you or like other people who normally do that weren't there, would the church go, well, this isn't acceptable, in the same way if you're like, oh, we haven't got bread and wine, we forgot to order it. You'd be like, that's quite problematic if you're like used to if you have like a Eucharistic service. If you're like, oh, well, there's no youth leaders, don't worry about it. If that's your response for that, but you would be like, wouldn't be the same about there was no worship music, or the band didn't turn up, or the preacher said, I haven't prepared anything, so let's not bother this week. If that would elicit a feeling in you, that isn't the same feeling when children's provision isn't there. Why?
Yeah. Good question. Where should we go from here? Have you got a big lesson you've learnt from youth or kids work, or just ministry along the way?
Yeah, I think it's quite an obvious one. So you're talking about having a toddler. I have a toddler, and I've also moved past that with other child. They do take things in a way that you might be otherwise kind of worried. I mean, maybe it depends like how relaxed you are about what children are taking in or not. But actually, that's a lesson that I've learned, that you do all these things and you think, has any of that done anything or gone in? But actually, it does come around. That's my encouragement to anyone who works with young people and children. I've been really privileged to have even just a really like small part in the journey of young people who are probably actually they're like getting to adulthood now, where they have responded to the Spirit and they've listened to God's knocking and they've done that business with God, and I've been able to walk with them. But it is nice to be able to take stock now and then and go, oh, do you know what? There has been transformation in their life. It wasn't me. It wasn't the youth leaders. But we were part of that mission with God. And so the lesson is take confidence that actually people are interested and it works, because they're not just a thing to program children and youth, but your ministry has an effect, even if it doesn't feel like it is possibly happening at that point.
Yeah, this isn't necessarily a question that I prepared you for. Do you have any advice for people who are listening who are from one of those churches where they don't like change and it's really hard to champion children in youth work?
I once heard this in a church. The minister said, they're praying, they said, thank you, God, for our young people here. And then she said something like, where would we be without them? Like, what would be the point without them here? And it really struck home. And this is quite a few years ago, because I did think, that's kind of right. Like, I know there is a point, but to be a family with a limb missing is terrible and it's broken. And so the advice is to like let that heartache do something in you and change you. And I wouldn't say like, oh, if you feel that heartache, there are not families here and there doesn't seem to be an appetite for it. It isn't like, right, I'm going to make a to-do list. I'm going to buy some discipleship materials. Becky mentioned a rug in the corner. Those things will be needed if that's what you discern is needed, and they will come. It's do that proper prayer and thinking and talking to God about, this really hurts actually, and why does it hurt? And because that would be what sustains you, because it's not a quick fix. This isn't, you can get this grant to fix this bit of your church. It's mechanical and it's great. It's a long kind of role. Mark 10:13. Go to that, spend some time in it, think about it, and let that kind of fuel you. Because once you're properly wired up, start looking. People have great ideas for what to do, even if you're not a trained teacher. You don't need to have been a trained teacher. These things are really helpful, of course, and God will use all of our skills and experiences, but they are there in the world, already existed. But it's if you can galvanize your church, which might just be a small group of people, to also think, are you unhappy with this missing limb here? Or we just tolerated it and it's fine actually, and we're just used to being a part down. Because if you're okay with being that part down, to repeat myself, nothing will change. Even all the awesome stuff you can get on websites won't change things.
Yeah, I think I just was thinking then of some churches I think are in a bit of a catch-22, aren't they? There obviously are some churches out there that don't have many or any children or young people or families that are part of things. And sometimes the excuse is, well, we don't do anything for kids and families because we don't have any, or we don't have enough of them to do anything. But then I think that sort of shoots the church in the foot a little bit, because perhaps the reason why you don't have more is because you're not doing anything for them.
Yeah.
Like sometimes we need to change the way we do things so that if we had somebody come, or when we have more people come who are like that, they feel welcomed and accepted in what we do, rather than waiting until you do and then
prepare in a way that
prepare the way.
if you did have families there, what would you be doing differently? Because, and this, I'm going back to something I said earlier, that will benefit everyone actually, because it gets you thinking about accessibility and language. I think there's a real synergy between, picture an adult in their 30s who has no Christian background, but something's been said in them and they come to church. In a way, they are, and they can be like highly educated and have a job that requires lots of thinking, but in a way they're kind of like children who are early in that discipleship journey, They've got none of the baggage of, well, church should be like this, and I should be seeing this and smelling this and hearing this. And so you might adjust things in anticipation for or hope for families, but actually it's a bunch of adults who go, I've actually really flourished since it's been going like this, because they're not bad ideas. Accepting your very helpful kind of warning earlier that you don't turn it into like CBB's church, because that's swung the other way, because then that wouldn't become helpful.
Yeah.
And listen to your community. Like you know, there are children, there are families and children there, and maybe what they don't need is you to adjust Sunday services first. They might want a space to feel welcome, and then when they feel belonging, they might start on that journey to believing. And that's still being church and ministering to children. You know, if your church has a really well supported and enshrined tradition of Eucharistic BCP on a Sunday morning, which I suppose showed my hand there that I don't think that's particularly family friendly, which I stand by. It's not, are you going to throw that out? But what are you going to do? How are you going to conduct mission to families in addition to that? Because that is what bringing them into the church actually means. But it's hard. It is hard. There's no easy. If there was an easy solution to families and church, it'd be a cracking book, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But it's not there.
Yeah, if there was an easy solution, we'd all be doing it already. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, some things, depending on the context, some things will work in your context and some things won't. And I think sometimes we need to just give them a go, give it a try. Maybe sometimes not just once, but like, try it a few times, see if it has an impact. And if it doesn't, we don't have to continue doing it. Try something else. You don't have to just say, oh, we've tried something, it didn't work, we're not going to try anything again. You can go back to the drawing board and find something that does work.
Exactly. And it's a joy, because also children are fun and young people's company is quite nice. They're not to be scared of. They are not like eroded by the adult world. They can be a really refreshing aspect to a church life if you truly seek it.
Yeah. And they bring something fresh, don't they? I think they bring a whole different perspective to things. We've hinted at it before. Sometimes we as adults can slip into the thing that we know more, or we have things sorted a bit more, or we're further along in the journey. But I think it's more helpful to think of it as we're all on a journey of faith. Children, young people are, we are as adults, and all of us have something insightful to share about that journey. And if we don't give children, young people a voice within that to share what they've learned, or what they're thinking, or what they have come across, then sometimes we miss finding out something more about God that we would have got through their eyes or from their perspective if we hadn't opened the door to that. And
I agree with you totally. But if you heard that and thought, well, Becky's wrong, children are incapable of being spiritual or prophetic or priestly until a maturity level, I would disagree with that. And I would say that if that is the kind of first hurdle, because if you don't see them as being genuine equal parts of the church with you as an adult, then that is an enormous hurdle. There are children in Scripture who show great insight. Samuel, his age isn't super clear, but there's an element of him being not adult. Naaman's servant girl. There are those examples, and they have broken through into Scripture in an adult-centric world where, also, let's face it, mostly it's male men doing all manner of things across the Bible on the whole. And so for any kind of child to rear their head and show that they are fully human immediately, they're not born inadequate, and that there's a journey to kind of get to, or born with sin, and that's something that we need to kind of address. They are fully human immediately, and they are part of that church. That's an enormous barrier if that's not some thinking that you've actually kind of done.
But thankfully we believe in a God who transforms hearts and minds, and so our hope and our prayer is that wherever hearts and minds needs to be changed about these things, that it's going to happen. If you're somebody who needs to be changed, then we pray for that. But also, if you're somebody who's waiting for the rest of your church to change and to have their hearts and minds transformed, then we pray for that too.
If anyone's listened, I appreciate that's a perfect ending as well, because
Yeah.
it's not this podcast that's transforming people. It's
It hopefully has challenged some people to think through what their perspective is and what their thought process is about children and young people within church. Hopefully there's stuff in there they've agreed with and that's been encouraging. I'm sure there's been a good mix of challenge and encouragement, and it's been great for you to unpack all that you're passionate about, the oppression of children and young people within the church. Thank you so much, Lewis, for coming today and for sharing with us. I'm sure we could have gone on for another 2 hours, you and I having a chat about this stuff. And maybe we'll get you to come on again.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I could recommend a book which is really instrumental in getting a lot of this thinking into my mind. People are readers. It is the book by R.L. Stolar, and it's called The Kingdom of Children, A Liberation Theology. And he articulates brilliantly why he thinks children are oppressed and a call to liberate them from a really informed position. He is an American chap, so that perspective on it does a really good job at trying to take the concept of childhood across kind of time and space, rather than just I live in this time in this place. Yeah, R.L. Stolar. Yeah. The Kingdom of Children, A Liberation Theology.
Thanks, Lewis. Lewis, thanks again for coming. To all of our listeners, thank you for listening today. And thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment if you want to on this podcast episode. It helps you find us again, helps other people find us if you like it, and share it. Don't forget to get in touch with us if you want to know what that book was that Lewis just mentioned. You didn't catch it, we can send you the information about the church audit as well if you want, that we mentioned earlier. Whatever you do for children and young people within your church, we are cheering you on with it. If you need any extra support to champion children and young people within your church, then that's what Youthwork Plus is here for. Get in touch with us if we can support you any further through training or advice, consultancy, or anything else that would be helpful. Get in touch with us. And apart from that, we will see you next time on the next one. Thanks, Lewis.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
That's all right. No problem.
All right. Yeah. See you later.
Cool. See you later. Bye.